say is just that Lee is beloved at Pew Research Center for many reasons, but maybe first and foremost that he is just a wonderful human being, a relentless optimist. And Lee, just by being himself, taught me more than any other human being, not just how to adapt to all the change in this world, but to really embrace it. And so he just brings such a wonderful perspective on technology. So I see we've got our head pastor joining us. Good morning, David.
Yes.
Well, hey, Courtney.
Hi there.
Coming.
I just finished introducing Lee, so maybe this is good timing.
Great. Let's pray. Father God, we give you thanks for this time, for Lee, for the gifts to be brought, and for the willingness to share them with our group, both in this room and our far-flung family online. Bless us in this time together, and may the Spirit help us to grow. In Christ we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks, Gordon. Thanks for being here.
I bring greetings to you from Aaron Fulp-Bykstad, whose daughter was married yesterday, and is my pastor.
I love it.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah.
All right.
Okay, so I do bring those greetings, and I'm so touched by what you said. And in case you didn't already know, you're in the presence of a giant in the most important field of social science at the moment, in her. She taught us all everything we know about how to do social science the right way. And I'm so grateful that she asked, and I'm grateful that I have the opportunity now to organize my thinking about artificial intelligence, which is a pretty daunting thing to get your arms around. On November 30th last year, so less than a year ago, ChatGPT was released to the world. And it was the third iteration of a large language generative artificial intelligence model that was being built. So there were precursor versions that people were beginning to use for all the things now that people use ChatGPT for. They ask it questions, they get answers, they want context. They can sometimes coax it into giving it useful information. Sometimes people ask it how to write code, and it's a really fabulous tool for helping computer programmers do their job better. And so, but this wide release to the world was the big bang moment for artificial intelligence. Actually, artificial intelligence has been around for a while. The big breakthroughs began, particularly on these large language models and generative AI, about a decade ago, when the sort of the math and the technology techniques for mining just incredible amounts of data and making sense of it, seeing patterns of it. There were breakthroughs in them, and they have been applied now for the last decade to a host of different things. So you're already AI users. You probably don't know it. Do you use a voice assistant like Siri or Alexa? You're an AI user. If you use GPS maps for turn-by-turn directions, you're an AI user. If your computer autofills the text that's about to come or spell corrects you in text and emails, you're an AI user. If you log on to a book website, and one of the things that you are asked to explore is, if you're interested in books like this, you might also be interested in books like that. That's AI use. If you use a language translation model, if you click Google, it's got a wonderful translation thing. I was in Japan for 2 weeks, and I just depended on this screen. I dictated into it, it kicked out both language and text in Japanese, and it was really easy to navigate a culture I didn't know the language in and didn't know the signage and things like that. If you've gotten a call from your credit card company saying a mysterious charge was made on your card, doesn't look like the pattern, it doesn't come from a place where you normally use your credit card, it didn't look like the kind of purchase that you normally make on your card, you're the beneficiary of artificial intelligence that's applied to pattern recognition in your credit score. So maybe that's a revelation to you that you're an AI user, but you are, and you have been for a while. So in a way, one of the most interesting stories about AI use is how it becomes normalized in our lives. You know, it's just doesn't, you don't say I'm using AI now, you say I'm using my voice assistant, or I'm telling Alexa to play my favorite song, or I'm telling it how to get to Emmanuel Presbyterian Church or whatever. And so it's been part of our lives, but this big bang moment occurred about a year ago. And what I think, we haven't ever polled on this, but I think the reason that it freaked people out is because it became the moment that computers acted like humans. They used words that were understandable. They understood conversation the way it was understandable. It wrote like a dream. Has anybody used a ChatGPT and stuff like that? It's really good. I mean, there are problems with it, like it makes up stuff and it misattributes things. One of the first things we discovered after it came out, about 2 weeks after ChatGPT came out, we started to get calls from news reporters who depend on the Pew Research Center for lots of different kinds of information. They were using it, and ChatGPT was kicking out alleged reports from the Pew Research Center that justified the claim that the language was using. And so the reporters would call us up and say, I see this reference to you, and I see this link to you, and I see this credible sounding Pew headline. I can't find the report on your site. What's going on? And it turns out it was just made up. And it's called hallucinations in the field. These are things that AI makes up. But in a way, it's understandable if you know how the technology works, because you feed in this incredible volume of data. In the most recent version of ChatGPT, I think it's close to 1 trillion different words, insights, other kinds of media and stuff like that. But it digests all this stuff, and the math of it, the sort of algorithm of it, literally is to predict the next word in a sequence of words. That's the whole magic of what this thing is doing. So it takes all of the stuff that it's learned and is going through iterations of it to just make credible guesses about what the next word in this sentence should look like, and what the next thought in this chain of thought should look like. And so when it was making claims about, I don't know, whatever was going on in the world, how do people think about the presidential election in the United States? Pew does a lot of work on that. And so, and we're sort of privileged in the algorithms. Pew is privileged in the algorithms for ChatGPT because we're such a wonderful, credible source for things. So once the word Pew became a logical next word for something related to a poll result on the presidential election, it slotted in the sentence. And the next word that follows Pew, of course, is research. And the word that follows Pew Research is Pew Research Center. So all of a sudden, it's kicking out these hallucinations that we're getting queried about. And so there are lots of ways that we have to, be now thinking about the legitimacy of sourcing. That it's getting better. I mean, even in the 11 months since then, the way in which they're integrating the sourcing of their information is much better and much more credible. And it also lets you fact check it. You can see if there's something underlying the link that they're citing and underlying the material that they've given you. And so that's why we're all freaking out about this now, because it's close to the thing that has been discussed in science fiction for a long time, is when computers start acting like humans and understand humans and serve humans in much of social science and science fiction. But the next logical thought is, well, when are they gonna take over? One of the lines of work that I enjoyed doing at Pew was not public opinion work, but we talked to experts about the future of the internet. And one of the early ones we did, about 2007, we asked about sort of smartness in machines and stuff like that. And it was way before this new set of systems, neural networks and machine learning techniques were in play. But one of the best responses in that survey came from a guy who ran a place called the Institute for the Future, and it's based in Silicon Valley, so he knows whereof he speaks. And he said, look, it's all going to turn out okay, because we'll program it in a way that they'll treat us like they're pets. The machines will. And I went on the news hour saying that, and it freaked out everybody in the studio. And so there are ways in which these large language models are just now being baked into lots of stuff. I've had the experience in now public meetings and public presentations where people, there used to be a phrase called live tweeting. When you give a speech, people would sort of give tweets about what you were saying and stuff like that. I've been live language modeled. I mean, people are looking up stuff that I'm saying in large language queries in ChatGPT or Bard or something like that. So it's just, it's getting baked into society, and yet it's spooky. And you ain't seen nothing yet. I mean, the stuff that's coming around the pike is going to make it more powerful, more compelling, more, and for some people more scary. There's emotion recognition that's coming into, there's a long, good literature based on photographs and how to read people's emotions. And even by different cultures, so sort of American emotional valence on your face looks different here than it does in Japan, for instance. Well, pretty soon, with your face recognition, with the camera in your phone, you can authorize it to be watching you and telling you, you seem upset today, maybe you should take a break. Or you seem hungry at the moment, why don't you go to the nearby Starbucks? And so that's one of the things. It will get better at understanding people's intent. So right now, it's kind of functions like a search engine. It starts looking for keywords and then backfilling its answers to you. But pretty soon, it's going to understand that, my version of what are the scariest things about AI when I type it into their system is going to be different from the Danish version and different again from the Nigerian version. And it will begin to understand, okay, this is Lee's context for it, and this is the Nigerian context for it. So it'll begin to get much more context and intent baked into it. It'll get much better because we're all giving it lots of feedback. We're telling it the questions that are on our mind. And there are ways now that in some language models, you've got a username and an account, and you can click on one of the profile buttons, and you can backfill a profile for yourself that it will remember as it responds to queries from you later times. And you can see how that's incredibly useful, because you want to get an answer related to you and your question and your context and your background, and you don't necessarily want the generic answer for things like that. So it's gonna get a lot more personalized if you authorize it. There's a lot of freak out about the privacy of this stuff. It's great for writing emails and presentations. And it's gonna, but the other thing that's coming up in parallel to this, or another AI system, is being able to take language and photos and replicate what it's seeing. So it's creating very credible and increasingly credible versions of you and your doppelganger. So if you feed in a relatively modest amount of voice text, your voice, to some of these systems, and then sort of say, have Lee give a talk at Bradley Hills. It will generate a video of me with my lower jaw moving. They're not yet quite sufficient for full mouth movement, but it'll come out like me knowing what it knows about me and AI and what a church group would be interested in, stuff like that. And I could have mailed in my my AI generated presentation today and still be in bed. The other thing that's happening right now, so this isn't around the corner, but it's happening now. It's all this venture capital money is going to the creation of language models for particular fields. So you feed it in the corpus of your field, and I'm sure Pew's in a ton of the political science, general social science things, but there are language models. I did a quick check yesterday, in the medical field. So the Mayo Clinic has built the LLM just for practitioners in medicine, biology, chemistry, math, law, physics, psychology, other social science disciplines, software developer and code writers, marketing professionals who are just gobbling the stuff up. They're terrified about it, but marketing is going to be very tied to AI generated copy and personalized stuff. So you've already gotten used to personalized ads to you. Wait till the copy machine or the copy that's written for that ad is very customized to you in your life. marketing professionals, journalists. There are AI language models just for journalists to use, which are sort of a combination of history and context and sort of up to the moment reference points. Farmers have their own LLMs, and AI is just enormous in agriculture. There are combines that are going through American fields this season that are getting their instructions from a satellite about go down this row first, pick these ears of corn, which seem to be the most ripe, stay away from those rows where it hasn't yet developed yet. And it's also feeding back information to the farmer and the supply chain. Sort of this fertilizer isn't working anymore the way that it used to. And these nutrients are missing in this field because it's taking soil samples as it goes. So farmers have got their own version of this. Accountants, government workers, historians, travelers. So travel, soon enough, and you can probably do it now. You can just plug in I'm going to Italy. Make a schedule for me, or tell me what I'd like to see. And it will, and it's going to be integrated with travel bots that can make the reservations for you. You say, yeah, go ahead and do this, and it'll make the reservations for you. We know your credit cards and make the payments for you, which is scary enough. Job recruiters, pretty much every job application to a major organization is first screened by an AI assistant. Are there keywords that show that this person is particularly qualified for the job, or particularly tuned into the field or your business or something like that, and separating them out from those that are just more sort of prosaic and not really referencing the things that you want in your field. Artists of all kinds have LLMs built for them, and poets. There's an LLM for poets. I looked if there was a spiritual one, and there's a company that's building a Bible GPT, or a chat Bible or something like that. So it's on the horizon that it will be done there. So the other big thing that's happening is it's being built into computer chips. AI is being built. So the next computer that you buy is going to have AI stuff that will do it on your desktop. You won't have to access a big cloud feature or something be connected to the internet. You can just generate it off your computer. And then a little bit down the line, you might have heard of things called the metaverse, where it's an immersive, it's like a gaming experience, if you know gaming, or kids and grandkids that know gaming, where it's, you're living in a completely different environment from the one that you're in real life. You wear these goggles, and soon enough you're going to be wearing just glasses or even contact lenses and be transported into these other worlds. Sometimes they'll look real. Sometimes they'll look completely fantasy driven and things like that. So, and some of the use cases for metaverse things is you'll be able to travel back in history, talk to Abraham Lincoln. You'll be able to see, Roman ruins, built and walk through the rooms that were literally available to the Romans at the time. Those facilities were built and stuff like that. So, that's the world we're heading into, and people are freaked out about this. I mean, more freaked out than not. We at Pew, we ask a question: are you more excited than concerned, or more concerned than excited? The concerned more than excited has always been a higher number than the more excited than concerned. After we did this survey, after Chat GPT came out and the other language models came out, the concern rose. And people don't like the idea that it's getting closer and closer to being human and stuff. And the most striking thing, the number I looked at in that survey that was so interesting to see, it was that the people who know AI the best, or at least self-reportedly know this, they're the ones who are most worried, or the level of their worry has grown in the past year since ChatGPT came into being. And that completely breaks a pattern that I studied, internet and technology since the year 2000. Up until this point in the study of technology, for 24 years of Pew work, the very strong pattern was the more you know it, the more you like it. You've built it into your life, that you're familiar with the techniques. You don't actually think it's technology working for you. It's just, the way you live life. You got a smartphone, and that's how you do it. And it has apps. You're not thinking, oh, thank God I'm using artificial intelligence now. But this pattern is now sort of especially interesting, because it's a break with that notion that the better you know it, the better you understand it. And I think part of the story on that is coming out of social media experience. You know, the big social media platforms went into existence 2009, 10, and 11. And the first wave of enthusiasm for that was pretty strong. It's just like a lot of other technologies. People thought it was great. They thought it was democratizing of information. You could connect with your friends and stuff like that. But we've seen now the darker sides of social media. And I think the public presumption about whether technology works out for us well or not has flipped, and it's being applied to artificial intelligence. So let's be wary, careful, cautious, even skeptical of this stuff, because we know that there are externalities that that are kind of spooky, and that's being applied here. I talked a lot. You maybe can tell that I grew up in New York, and I've moved to Washington in the late 70s. So I talk fast and long. It's like toxic. So I should have made clear, I would love questions as I go along. I know sometimes you save questions for the end, but let's mix it up on this if you have questions about this. Yeah.
Does ChatGPT have a way to answer and respond and learn from that? I say that because I asked ChatGPT, what is the song that has the following words? And it gave me an answer, and I knew it was a wrong answer. They said it's Onward Christian Soldiers, and I knew it was not that. So I said, that's wrong. And I expected ChatGPT not to understand that this was a follow-up question, but it did. It gave me another wrong answer. But it started off by saying, you didn't give me enough information. So the correct answer is going to give another wrong answer. So my question for you is, your fault.
Yeah, that's right.
It was built in to respond to and
Yes.
learn from that.
Yes, but your one query is that one query. Once it gets 1,000 versions of that query, once it gets 5,000 versions of that query, it will know, it will learn the context. And so that's why they're desperate for you to authorize them to be learning and iterating from the feedback you're giving it. Every input that you're giving it, the questions you ask, the follow-ups you ask, the challenges that you make is all baked into the models. And eventually it'll show up. I mean, it's getting much better and some of the language models now give you a percentage of how likely it is that the answer they're giving you is right. So it will say, you know, these 3 words, I don't know, I'm gonna take a stab at this because it's in the Presbyterian hymnal, and I'm wrong. You tell it it's wrong, and it'll sort of start narrowing the scope. So 5 years from now, it will have embraced all of that feedback in a way that it'll get better at giving you better answers. And one of the most striking things to see as language models develop, particularly from going from GPT-3 to GPT-4, which had a lot more parameters and a lot more information in it, that GPT-4 is the one that passes the bar exams, and ACEs, the MCATs, and the LSATs and stuff like that. So, it's getting better, and partly it's because of the teaching, and partly because it's getting feedback. That's why they do beta testers, and partly because the coders themselves now know kind of where they get tripped up on things, and they're writing better code.
We have a chat question. Can you comment on AI's bad probabilities in politics?
Yeah, so the thing that people are freaked out about now is, of course, misinformation and information war kind of stuff. And particularly in a context where it's getting more credible, it's looking more customized to you, it's getting better at citing its own sources. There are ways in which, well, I'm going to call it this, the Steve Bannon throw everything against the wall strategy works best. These tools not only are being used to generate much more political information, and particularly like solicitations, like donor emails or even donor letters you're getting are probably being written by AI, again, to your address, knowing at least that you have voted, not necessarily how you voted, but it's just going to become now part of the information wars that are endemic to politics. The Russians are going to get good at it. The North Koreans are going to get good at it. The Chinese are going to get good at it. And sort of the larger theory that's played out over the past maybe a decade or so in politics is just confuse people. You don't need to convince them. Confusing them is good enough, especially if you've got malevolent purposes. You don't need them to buy into your narrative or your facts. You just need them to be so confused and so disheartened by the confusion that you can't bother to sort of get to the bottom of what the truth really is or not. So that's one dimension of politics. The other, there's an upside that people talk about. I mean, in so far as it knows you and voters and stuff like that, get out the vote campaigns might get a lot better. And the targeting of them might get a lot better. And maybe it will learn how to convince skeptics to take that next step that they are now reluctant to take because they're entering a environment that's all noise and no truth and stuff like that. So there are two sides to all of this. And so there's an upside that people talk about just as well. But I mean, I think the presumption is both in the expert community and in among lay people who watch this, we're in for a rough ride here for a period of time, because it's just so good at generating all sorts of stuff that is, just is chaotic particularly for democracies. Yeah.
One of the concerns that a lot of people have is AI is going to take their jobs away. This is particularly noted where you have the strikes going on in the creative fields, like writers and artists, like what's going on with Hollywood. But I'm also in a field that's probably going to be impacted. But we see our field not going away, but changing. I'm a librarian.
Yeah.
Okay. And one of the things that we do is make sure that the information we give to people is the correct information. And that doesn't seem to change, because people come in with all kinds of ideas. They said, oh, I saw it on the internet. And they think of the internet as a librarian, but it's not. We still have that judgment where we can use other resources to check things. But people are afraid of their jobs being taken away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this is this step in my slides just before we get to the spiritual part, which I know why you invited me here, but the model, the sort of meta model across the board, across professions in many ways, is that AI at a minimum will become an assistant, a concierge, a pal, a doppelganger that knows you, knows what you're interested in, is supports you and as you're making decisions or trying to decide, trying to make up your mind about something, and so across the board. And there are ways in which I argue that we're going to go through a big sort between machines and humans about which entity is good for what. And I think the list of things that machines are getting better at, not necessarily better than humans, but are getting good enough to be part of the human calculation, is growing. And the sort of special sauce of being a human being is what's on the table here. And so in a sort of secular context, it's humans are still vastly better at judgment things. Humans are vastly better at making decisions in chaotic and confusing circumstances, making hierarchical judgments, tying things together and pattern recognition and things like that. Humans are good at understanding humans. And to the degree that the machines aren't quite yet there, that's a sort of special thing that humans have. And then, of course, let's go straight to the exciting.
So voice substitution and fake statements.
Yeah.
Political candidates.
Yeah. Oh, then we're going to see fake video. As a matter of fact, that has already happened in this presidential campaign, where campaigns have put out fake material alleged to be said by their opponents. And it just, again, in this sort of let's sow a lot of chaos scenario that I was talking about, that's a big part of it. It's who is going to be able to discern what's the fake thing and what's the real thing, and whether the idiot candidate really did say that stupid thing, or whether it's just a misinformation, a misdirection kind of thing. So yeah, that's a big part of the worry, is that we're all going to be convincingly introduced to material that looks just like you'd expect it to, from the people that you'd expect it to come from. So we're gonna, essentially our BS meters are going to have to get a lot better.
Bob Dean's talked about that. That was
That's right.
the theme last week, our BS.
Reliable source.
Yeah.
My judgment has been fatally occluded because I hear people actually saying things that I can't believe they're saying.
Yes, yes, it's good for that, yeah, no, that's, yeah, exactly. And so if you spool that back, if you sort of did the forensics on where that craziness came from, it's some combination of this stuff and culture stuff and neighborly stuff, and it's, it's.
So what happens to these AI models as AI puts much more stuff out there and it's training on, it's kind of self-perpetuating loop. And my understanding is there's no discernment as to whether information it's ingesting is true or false. It's just information.
Even before the language models became sort of the centerpiece of the public imagination, all the ways in which you don't see hate speech online are AI mediated and AI sort of scanned out. So there are ways in which the good guys can learn from this stuff, identify, chronically bad sources of information and sort of say, just generally any stuff that comes out from a place like this is downgraded in our algorithms or the weight that we're going to give them in thinking about them as part of the answer. Spam is a chronic part of life, but I've seen data. Basically, we get a lot less spam now than we did 20 years ago, and there are spam filters that are AI, organized, that are doing a decent job at that. The other thing that people argue about in the context of there's hope around the future is there will be. Well, I'd be interested in your thoughts on this, and especially your thoughts on. I think it'll be the case. Certainly, there'll be an LLM that markets itself as the truth vector, and it will only use sources that are widely recognized to be true. Will learn as it goes along about what some of the most obvious fakery looks like and feels like. Will and give things a score. It might, when you do a query, it might say this seems 90% likely to be the thing you're looking for, and it's the truthful thing. 10% might look like this. You might want to check it out just if you're doing the rundown that a librarian would do as you go through it. Is that responsive to your question?
Yeah, but one of the things I was reading about was, especially as they release models, which you can now train yourself for your
Yes.
specialty.
Yeah.
That the ability to sidestep these guardrails.
Yeah.
And so, and then suddenly, who's the one who's actually judging what's authoritative and what's not?
Yeah, doggone it, we're human, yeah. So 'twas ever thus. One of my assertions without tons of data behind it is that there's nowadays in the internet age, there isn't any more stupidity than there ever was in the human species, any more narcissism than there ever was, any more gullibility than there ever was. What the difference is at this age is we see all the bad stuff more visibly.
Yeah.
So it's just out there because people are posting it on social media, or you're hearing the knucklehead that you never would have heard in your favorite local tavern, but is coming from the other side of the world and is has some access to you and your consciousness and stuff like that. So, and we debate this a lot at Pew. How do you study this? Because you can, and there are lots of interesting ways that we've contributed to that conversation. But at the end of the day, how people make up their minds about stuff is a unfolding mystery still. And so people are going to believe stupid stuff, and people are going to do stupid stuff. And it's some amalgam, and actually it's different for different people. So, but it's some amalgam of their upbringing, their genetic predispositions, the culture that they live in, the circumstances of the moment that they're in, the tribes that they belong to, and the LLMs maybe in the future that they rely on, stuff like that. So all of this stuff is rattling around, sometimes in your subconscious, in the Daniel Kahneman fast and slow systems, you're only deciding about maybe a fraction of the stuff that is input into your brain and all. So there you go. Sorry, that's my bleakest answer. But it's sort of, we've survived for, pick your number, 100,000 years with that just being a human reality, and we muddled through. At the great, and one of the historic examples on that is when there was an explosion of information, cheapening of the process of creating and disseminating information when the printing press, the movable type printing press came in the 16th century. And among the things that came in the next 100 years from information getting cheaper, more widely dispersed, was much greater publication and belief in witchcraft, in folklore, and in alchemy, among other things. So alchemy. And so we've been through misinformation ages of, that lasted, for generations. But eventually we got the scientific method and the Royal Society of London and all the other spin-offs from stuff like that. And people, and it's sort of the norm of the culture, particularly the scientific culture, became, show me your evidence. You can't just sort of invoke, whatever you want to invoke in this. Show me your evidence. Let's kick the tires. Is it replicable? I mean, can the rest of us come up with the same emphasis? And it doesn't count as truth if you can't disprove it. If you can't sort of test it to know whether it's true or false, it's a belief or an act of faith rather than a fact. And so we got out of that mess. We also had the 30 Years' War as a result of it, and with lots of carnage for that. But we have a history of eventually popping out the other end. And what people argue is different about this moment is that it's the speed with which this is all changing is just too disorienting. We had time to gather our wits and form institutions and processes and stuff like that let us figure out truth from fiction in the good old days, but we don't necessarily have that luxury now. I don't know whether I believe that or not, but it's certainly the argument.
See that it's generational.
Yeah, there's a really interesting generational story, but look at us in this room. At the dawn of the internet, I'm sure there were people who were looking at us as early internet users. Like the library community was not a fan of the early internet. Maybe still isn't, but it's like not doing things the right way with the right vigilance, with the right sort of techniques, and lots of training about how to figure out the good stuff from the bad stuff. And yet we haven't blown ourselves up yet. So yeah.
Do you anticipate there's going to be chat GPTs for particular tribes?
Yeah.
The Fox News tribes
Yeah.
and so forth?
Oh yeah, of course. Because one of the sort of grand imperatives of the internet era was that anybody who cared about having any interest in civic life and voice in civic life, and any organization that wanted to do that, had to become a publisher. It used to be that you could depend on, dealing with lobbyists who had the right connections and knew the right gatekeepers and stuff like that. And every organization, and we learned this at Pew, you have to become a discerning, smart publisher. And the second piece of that, which is less well understood, but I think is now really clarifying, is you have to be a community builder. You have to figure out how to build a tribe. Otherwise, you don't survive the carnage either. And that's a noble thing. I mean, if you would argue, you know what, I'm going to go through my 11 things in the spiritual and religious world that I could think of where, this is now in play. How do we think about this stuff, what it's going to do to us, and where I think the call to lots of churches is going to be help your members, help your denomination, and help the world think through these things. So here are my 11 things, and you guys, I've got my slide live, so I'll add to it if you feel like it. So humans are special because of their consciousness, self-awareness, and awareness of others, and unique elements of intelligence, like I was going through before. The second one is we have free will and free purpose. There's huge debates about that. I know, there's a decent arguments about whether we have free will or not, but I'm going to just say that we think we do, and so by God, we're going to, we should be training ourselves on that. That we also understand ourselves to be autonomous with our own agency. which is a, a special thing that probably animals don't have. We have the ability to cooperate. We have the social skills, thanks to our wonderful, beautiful brains and consciousness, to think about how to move others and to join us. We have language and culture and storytelling, and machines don't do that. Yeah, and one of the moments when they have passed through a gigantic boundary to understanding intent and understanding stuff like that is that they have, something looking like language, culture, and storytelling. Humans have capacity, compassion, moral reasoning, and ethical intelligence. And these machines don't process things that way, and animals don't process things that way. That's special to us, I would argue. We have curiosity, the ability to learn and adapt. I mean, in the animal world, that's genetically coded, and it takes a long time for evolution to figure out how to get smarter about things. For us, we can teach each other stuff, and I think this will happen with AI. I mean, there's going to be, and already is sort of underway, really interesting, large scale, sort of disparate, but eventually they'll find each other movements about teaching new literacies, how to be good with this stuff, how to build it into our lives better. But I think humans are good at that. Machines aren't particularly good at that, so that's a plus factor for us. We have creativity and the ability to build tools. AI now is writing its own code, so maybe that's off the table now in some ways. And in the age of maker spaces, the librarians know this world really well. There are machines now that you feed some plastic into it and the specs to something, and it'll build you a Christmas tree, or it'll build you a radio transmitter, or it'll build you a little mini computer and stuff like that. And it'll build houses. There are houses being built with maker space types machines. We have emotional capacity and intelligence, so we know the difference between happiness and sadness, fear and disgust, and things like that. And these machines don't get that stuff yet. We can think abstractly, which is a big, it's not yet part of the AI universe. And the punchline for me is the capability of having a relationship with God, including understanding our own divine spark. I don't think machines are going to get there, but there's a really interesting line of argument. Courtney was part of this too. When we began to study this work really sort of intensely and frequently, it used to be episodic, and Pew decided to make it a really central part of its portfolio. We invited in a series of experts to sort of school us on what would have been interesting questions for the field and stuff like that. One of the first philosopher who came in to talk about this was actually a medical philosopher. And he's written a book about what are we going to do when these machines maybe develop something that looks a lot like consciousness, which means that therefore it might have the capacity to suffer or be happy or have any of the emotions, which means that it might have an independent intelligence. And so what are we going to do? Is it ethical to shut off those systems because they might take over the world, but it's going to cause, some version of what we might understand to be suffering for that thing that's perceived as consciousness? And this is an active debate in philosophy now that we are not maybe the sole proprietors of consciousness and free will and stuff like that. And so the big debate you've probably read about is whether we're going to, now it's how soon are we going to get to it rather than are we going to get to it? Artificial general intelligence, which is the kind we have. We have, general intelligence. We can apply our intelligence to anything that we set our minds on, right? And we can add applications of intelligence to it. These machines, particularly in this generative AI system, are heading there. And one argument says, doesn't matter whether they actually have intelligence or not, they're going to look so much like it that we have to act like they have it. Another argument is, we got to have some guardrails to make sure that we have the kill switch if it looks like they're going to take over, like Skynet in the Terminator films and stuff like that. And so there's a huge debate about how you keep humans in charge of this process, but our AGI, as an artificial general intelligence, is on the table now. And so, what are we going to do about it? So again, talking too loud and too fast. Yeah.
What are the legal ramifications?
Yes.
For example, inciting to riot
Yes.
is a crime.
Yeah.
So, but who's responsible?
Yeah.
For the chat
Yeah.
GPT and saying, somebody to put it.
Yeah, what happens if a self-driving car kills a person? Who holds liability for that? The code writer? The company that implemented the car? The public agencies that are supposed to now sort of incorporate proper insight and signage and warnings and stuff like that. So, yeah, the legal stuff is essentially on the table here. And in part because there are ways in which these machines are already doing things that we don't understand and that they can't explain. And so one of the sort of precepts, the principles that people are trying to apply to rolling out these systems like the EU and parts of the United States government are thinking about, should we not let this stuff out in the wild until it can explain its decisions, until it's transparent about how it does things. I mean, one simple way to think about this is there's a really credible talk about a Food and Drug Administration and FDA for algorithms. So you apply a sort of test first regime to it, and it doesn't get released to the general public until it proves it's safe and until it proves it's effective on the terms that you want it to be effective. So it's like a drug protocols and things like that.
Then there are those who would argue that runs up against First Amendment free speech.
Yeah. Although, the drug companies might have free speech, but they can't, it's not unlimited. And so maybe the parallel can be applied there too, that there are ways in which, you don't want dangerous code about how to do new biopathogens.
Right.
Yeah.
If you're looking at an FDA type model for algorithms about politics.
Yes, right. Who do you want adjudicating that? Yeah. Well, it's so interesting now that when Pew just released, I helped write the survey, but I wasn't around to help write it up, and it was a beautiful thing they released last week on generally on privacy and things like that. And one of the series of questions was about privacy in the AI context. How can we make sure that we retain the identity we want and control over our information as we're feeding this beast, sometimes inadvertently kind of things. And people were worried about privacy in the general context because they don't trust tech companies. And so that's always on the table. But the thing that's now in play that was showing up in this data for the first time I could see is there were partisan splits on it. Republicans are more worried about the misuse of their information by anybody, the government, machines, whatever, than Democrats are. And it is one of the striking things about technology in the period I was studying. It was sort of pre-partisan. There were little sort of differences of opinion at the margin around now being swept up into the partisan maw, where people are now going to do what partisans do, which is a new thing has happened. What does my tribe say about it? And they're going to take their cues and make their trust judgments around sort of the mediating force of their politics rather than a little bit more open-mindedness.
Lee, thank you so much for being here. This has been such a great conversation. I'm encouraged by your encouragement. But I wonder, but I also wonder, what do you worry about? And what concerns you about the development of AI? And what do you think? And what do you think needs to be done?
So if I were still wearing my Pew hat, I would be prohibited from answering that question, but I'm not anymore. So yay, it's Lee Unchained. I'm still different. My first half of my professional life was as a journalist, so I have no detectable belief system, which is awesome. My Pew is a great match for me. It runs the sort of timeline perspective. I am worried about democracy, and there are things to worry about even without this stuff in the mix. With this stuff in the mix, it just makes the challenge that much greater. And part of it is this really interesting intersection that we took some stabs at Pew, and we did a good job, and there's much more to do about the intersection of interpersonal trust and trust in institutions. and people are worried that they're connected. You know, the less you trust your neighbor, the less you might trust the police department or the Department of HHS or whatever. And the way that the modern world was built was on trusted institutions, you know, that they were potentially, you know, experts and were honest brokers of information and used the scientific method as they were making decisions, stuff like that. And there are so many ways now that individuals are empowered, or you know, quite ill-meaning groups now have the same tools available that you know, gigantic bureaucracies used to have. I mean, you know, there's you know, somebody in a garage lab that's now thinking about how to do a bioweapon. And that's gonna, you know, it's just scary as hell. So that's it. That then speaks to my second bucket of worries, which is just bad actors using this stuff in bad ways. Just watching if it's out in the wild, if it's particularly widely dispersed with, you know, for whatever reasons. There are just tons of ways now that people who have malevolent purposes have this at their disposal and can make life miserable for all the rest of us. Here's the way that I'm goofily sort of okay with this stuff. In the longer term, you know, if humans lose our preeminence, let's you know, in the Genesis, you know, version of things, I don't know that that's a bad thing. Sharing our intelligence. I mean, so the grand story of humanity is the more intelligence there is to things, usually the better off there is. There are bad people who misuse it, but by and large, the greater increments of intelligence applied to whatever things make it a better place. And it creates wealth, it creates well-being, it creates prosperity under the right circumstances. Well, let's say that the silicon version of our meatware or our wetware comes pretty close. I'm not sure, you know, that's happened to lots of other species too. You know, single cell organisms got preempted by other things, and maybe we just take our place in the universe that isn't sort of top of the, oh God, no, it's a bad analogy, top of the food chain. But you know, in the search for extraterrestrial life, one of the presumptions is that really advanced civilizations aren't going to send their biological species into space to find us. They're going to send robots that don't die and can be in a spaceship for however long you're riding through the wormhole or whatever it is. And so so anyway, that's a goofy way to get through this.
Lee, I would love to hear your thoughts. You know, you're speaking with a whole congregation of people that care about spirituality and want to have a growing, successful religious community. So thinking about AI, fine, but maybe just technology more broadly. Do you if you were, you know, kind of in a leadership position of a religious community, like your congregation or Bradley Hills, are there applications of technology that you think folks like us should be thinking about to help grow our spiritual community? Are there things that we should be doing? I mean, we obviously do live streaming. That's okay. Yeah. That's great. But there's probably a lot more that we might do to help people and grow our community. I don't know if you've ever thought about that.
I think a lot about this, and I start from the other direction. So I'm on any number of committees over the years in our church, and one of the longer standing arguments I've made with not stupendous success, because it's hard to imagine what it would look like, is basically this is a crowded world already, and with information and things like that. So one of the obvious responses to this is to create sanctuaries where things aren't crowded, where deliberation is encouraged, or not even deliberations, your own contemplation, your own sort of reckoning with things, your own sort of quiet spaces, so that you're not overwhelmed by just a flood of noise that's you know, aimed at you every minute of every day. So all of the dark side stuff that about technology itself, you know, has its opposite. It's to the degree that it becomes an effective tool of persuasion. I could see congregations thinking through, with the help of technology, particularly language models, sort of how do we land better? How does our messaging, how does our personality, how does our community culture get conveyed in a way that people will listen. And the other thing particularly related maybe to being available on Zoom is, it's so interesting. I used to give this speech to marketers a lot. You've got to throw everything against the wall to see what works. I mean, there are so many ways in which, and so many people who have different sort of touch points with this, that sort of a uniform strategy and a uniform set of ways to dealing with folks probably isn't the right one. You know, you're going to be thinking differently about teenagers and messaging to them and sort of making a compelling case to them than you are with 80 somethings. And so you never can tell. I mean, you know, in our recent past, you know, all of a sudden, you know, Facebook was a big blowout, sexy, you know, compelling kind of thing. And now people have turned against it for what they've seen on it. And TikTok has just come out of nowhere in the past couple of years. So the other thing is to, you know, try to be vigilant about, you know, the next big thing or the next sort of modest thing. Yeah, I got it.
I want everybody to know, first of all, you definitely are the model. How we could have ever found, Courtney could have found you when we came up with this topic. We went, how on earth can anyone address the spiritual, the technological, you know, knowledge and being human?
Yeah.
And as a human, and people need to know that he has donated his time. It's accepted no honorarium. His presence.
This is for
with us
Courtney.
is a huge
Is there anything Courtney ever asked me to do? I would say, you know, so I don't know, in your pledge cards, you know, give her the credit.
Thank you enough. And I want everybody to stay tuned. Next week, we have Bruce Epperly coming. He has written the book, The Elephant is Running, and the topic is, how can we learn to appreciate and deal with the multi-religions surrounding us?
Yeah.
And keep our Christian perspective.
Good.
That should be a fascinating topic as you, well, but I don't know.
It's all in place.
Thank you so much.
Long Island, Nassau County.
I grew up in Westchester.
Oh, yeah.
Suffolk
Same deal.
You don't have a New York accent.
I don't. My parents were New Englanders, and so,
Okay, no, my
so
parents
I
grew up
got scrubbed of it. Yeah, oh, yeah, no.
But then I went to college in Massachusetts, graduate school in Michigan. I lost.
Yeah,
my
okay,
New York
yeah.
accent.
Thank you very much. You're a great communicator.
Goodbye, guys.